While I haven't read the Daredevil comics, I have really come to appreciate his character from the Netflix TV show. Those 3 seasons are excellent TV and some of the best stuff made by Marvel Studios. While not nearly as good, I did enjoy the Ben Affleck film, and thought the director's cut version of it did a better job, by omitting some scenes that didn't work in the theatrical cut, and adding in some better ones. I have found it odd that Daredevil has never received a good video game treatment. The character has a lot about him that can easily lend itself to a good action-adventure game. One was in development for the PS2, but it got cancelled before we ever got a chance to play it. While Daredevil has appeared in other Marvel games as a playable character, he has only had one solo game so far. On the GBA, Daredevil received a video game based on the film. Sadly, this game is not that good and honestly does not do the character justice. Daredevil is a side-scrolling action-adventure game with a focus on platforming and combat. The strongest element of Daredevil comes from its presentation. The visuals are great with some captivating, vibrant colors, along with a soundtrack that is too good for this game. To the game's credit, it's an original story that happens to use the marketing from the film to gain attention for the game. Characters who appear in the comics but not in the film are featured, like Stick. I do like that they decided to go for an original story, but since the overall game isn't very good, I didn't really spend time to figure out if the rest of the narrative was good as well. Daredevil comes up short in every other area. The gameplay is simply not good. In Daredevil, you can jump, punch, stun people with your baton, and use your Daredevil vision. What is good about the combat are the sound effects and the stylized words that pop up when you take someone out. Sadly, the minute-to-minute fighting is clunky and not satisfying at all. Many times you will knock down an enemy and need to wait for them to get back up before you can damage them again. You cannot damage them while they are lying down. This is incredibly tedious as you slowly wait for an enemy to get back up, and this can happen a few times fighting just one person. I have no idea who thought this was a good idea, and it makes the entire thing feel like it was never playtested. Along with this, the action has horrible hit detection. Many times it will look like you can actually hit someone, but the blow will not connect at all. It is wildly inconsistent if you're going to land a punch. This usually becomes a problem when you're right on top of an enemy, and nothing will connect, but then other times they will. As you are fighting through the levels, there are a few pickups to grab, like more health, an icon for in-game rewards, armor, super strength, and more. The general movement feels a bit slippery as well, almost like you are ice skating on the ground. To Daredevil's credit, the platforming is a bit better than the combat, and I enjoyed performing the double jumps to get around, so much so I was using them as a means to run away from enemies, if the game didn't require me to beat all of them to proceed. There's a few standout levels that I did enjoy. One of the early stages has you fighting and jumping from car to car in traffic. This is a creative and fun level from a design standpoint, but the general combat brings everything down. I also like the design of a few levels where you are on top of a train, but then again the combat sucks, and it's hard to tell when to jump to dodge objects that will hit you. So there's a handful of bosses in Daredevil, and they range from okay to bad or just too easy. The first boss fight is Elektra, and it's really annoying. She is hard to hit as she jumps around and slashes you while moving. Oddly enough, the second boss is much easier and has a little interesting mechanic. He will use a smoke grenade on you and then you cannot see him, unless you turn on your vision to see where he is. The Swamp King is really uninspired, as all you need to do is stand there and punch him until he is dead. Another boss fight on a train is kind of interesting in that it requires you to use your vision again. You will go into tunnels and as a result you cannot see her, so turning on your vision makes short work of her. Bullseye is way too easy as you can just crawl to dodge most of his shots and hurt him this way too. And the Kingpin is just annoying as he's hard to land hits on. The bosses are are wildly inconsistent when it comes to their level of difficulty, and some just feel lazy like the Swamp King. What sucks is that the two bosses that require you to use your Daredevil vision give us a glimpse of interweaving something interesting about our hero into the boss encounters, but it is oddly used as a surface level thing in 2 fights. All of this could have been a lot better. My biggest issue with the game is how it's an insult to the character. Daredevil could lend itself well to having some optional stealth sections, and having a better fighting system than this, along with more interesting platforming to really show off his agility. When the bulk of your game is centered around punching people and that is not fun, the gameplay completely crumbles. You can tell the combat is bad and tedious when you can run away from most enemies, without needing to defeat them to proceed. Sadly, the game even knows this, and in certain levels you cannot proceed until you defeat all of the bad guys. Honestly, Daredevil deserves a good video game. An interesting idea would be to find a way to interweave his superhero side with his day job. For example, it would be cool to play as Matt Murdock as his day job as a lawyer. The player can make choices like in an RPG, and that would affect the game. Sort of like if he was at trial, and during it he could make decisions that could alter the fate of an individual. Or a good developer could use those sections to have an investigative element to it, and then fight as Daredevil at night, and that would be the meat and potatoes of the gameplay. Like I said, I think a nice mixture of action and stealth could work really well here, along with the freedom to tackle encounters like how Daredevil would. It is a real shame that the only solo game of his sucks, and does not do him justice at all. The developers needed to greatly refine the combat in this game. Having horrible, inconsistent hit detection is annoying and wonky, while actively working to frustrate the player. Punching a bad guy should be enjoyable, not a chore. And along with this, the tedious nature to the combat ruins the bulk of the game. One other positive element I forgot to mention was some of the unlockables. You can unlock some of Daredevil's comics and wallpapers along with optional costumes for Daredevil and the bosses. These unlockables are pretty cool and more accurate towards the comics. Before we move to the conclusion, I want to again mention the soundtrack. This music is way too good for this game and is easily one of the best aspects about it. Here are a few tracks from the game. Daredevil and the Game Boy Advance is a bad game. While the platforming isn't that bad, the combat is easily the worst aspect of the game, and since the combat takes up the bulk of the experience, this means there's no avoiding how bad it is. Landing punches on enemies is very inconsistent, that you honestly never really know if your hit is gonna connect, and paired with this, the combat is extremely slow, because enemies will often get knocked down and you cannot hit them while they're down, which means you need to wait for them to get back up before you can fight them again. Daredevil's heightened senses is a really cool aspect to his character, and it is mostly just used to highlight pickups and collectibles. There are 2 instances where this is sort of used in an interesting way, and both deal with 2 of the easier boss fights, but they both disappear in some fashion, so you need to use your vision to defeat them. I wish the developer took the time to provide gameplay that properly reflects the character's abilities. The obvious one would be to make the combat more responsive, consistent, and satisfying, but when it comes to his vision and senses, this should be conveyed in the gameplay as well, more so than just being used to highlight collectibles. While I do not have the answers on how to implement something like this is where I would want talented developers to design something that highlights why Daredevil is so awesome. As it stands, it's a very lackluster game that is not worth playing at all. It sucks that the only Daredevil game is not a good one. I do not recommend it. If you're interested in being notified of new videos, please hit the subscribe button and bell. And if you would like to support the channel and get early access to content, please check out my Patreon. All of the links will be at the end of this video and within the description, and thank you very much for watching.